So the fifth installment of the Indiana Jones franchise just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it was soundly regarded, soundly, is that the right word? I don't know. Roundly? That's probably what I mean. Roundly regarded as a flop, in spite of the fact that the film is actually pretty good. In fact, it's at least my fourth favorite Indiana Jones film. I mean, it's hard to beat those three that came out in the 1980s, right? And not just simply because of nostalgia for everything 1980s, but because they were set in the 1930s, which has some sort of romantic appeal to it. And let's face it, Harrison Ford was younger. And there's something about seeing a young hero, jumping about and doing heroic things that's more appealing. All right, that has nothing to do with what I want to talk about. What I want to talk to you about is the fact that it was regarded as a flop. And while, various prognosticators anticipated it would have a larger box office, and then in the postmortem, we're analyzing why it may not have achieved the success that was hoped for, Collider made an interesting observation among their suggestions as to the demise of the film. That we haven't seen Indiana Jones since 2008. And in the 15 years since, Gen Xers like myself, who are its largest fan base, have only gotten that much older. And perhaps we are tired of the Indiana Jones franchise, that brand, the character, and as a result, maybe things, in the 1980s more broadly, and perhaps just tired generally, right? I mean, I wake up exhausted, and I find myself napping now in the afternoon, like 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I've never napped in my life, but anyway, again, another tangent for another time. But this suggestion that perhaps our generation is just aging out of the things that they loved, has lost enthusiasm for those things that once brought us joy and excitement and brought us to movie theaters, and perhaps that was the reason why the movie did poorly, I don't know, was curious to me in the very least. And part of the suggestion was that younger folks also, they don't know who Indiana Jones is, and they don't care about them, and you need those folks to have a big box office, and that seems to make sense. But staying with this idea that maybe our generation is not interested in the things that we grew up in our youth. First off, anecdotally, I do not find that to be true. My friends and I get very excited about all things 1980s pop culture, movies, music, TV shows, anything that's bringing back or continuing things that we grew up with, or looking at them anew, or tangential to the 1980s, or themed or set in the 1980s. We are equal parts excited about Beetlejuice 2 and the next Ghostbusters and the final season of Stranger Things. I even checked out that Apple TV series Physical, starring Rose Byrne, although that probably had something to do with the leotards that the ladies are in all the time. Again, well, lots of things that I should say for another episode or a therapy session. But this idea that maybe Indiana Jones in particular failed because of our generation's lack of interest. I approached it, I considered it with at least a grain of salt again, even though it was counter to my own experiences. And then Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 came out this weekend. And I dismissed that whole, theory of colliders just altogether. Because, and despite the fact that Mission Impossible made something like $250 million or $245 million, $235 million during the first several days of its opening against a $400 million budget with marketing included. It was also considered to be a lackluster performance. Now, I'd like to fail at anything making $235 million in a week, by the way. But according to the New York Times, the spectacular and perhaps unrealistic result that Hollywood expected did not materialize. So even Mission Impossible, another franchise that wasn't born in the 1980s, certainly more recently than that, in the 1990s, I guess was the first film, is also failing to meet what Hollywood would expect. And Gen Xers are not driving the box office on a Mission Impossible, and certainly younger folks are interested in these films. If you remember just a couple of years ago, Tom Cruise was, credited with saving movies, right? To avoid any conflict with the effects of COVID, he postponed Top Gun Maverick for a couple of years, and then, theaters are back, baby. Well, maybe not. But instead of blaming Gen X for maybe the lackluster performance of Indiana Jones, Let's consider the fact that Mission Impossible may have failed to meet expectations, and you've got films like Disney's latest film, Pixar. You've got DC's franchises, The Flash and Shazam, all failing to meet expectations. Heck, I'm not really excited about the Marvel TV shows anymore, and I used to be thrilled about those. So something else is at play, something that you can't lay on the shoulders of Gen X, including the fact that theater-going habits have not returned to their pre-pandemic ways. I used to see films all the time, and I hardly see them in theaters anymore. And that's in part because of how I got used to not seeing them, but also because of something that Hollywood is doing to shoot themselves in the foot while blaming other folks. Now you could see a movie in theaters and know that within 45 days, it's going to be streaming on your TV. When we were kids, you had to wait a year at least for something to come out on VHS. And boy, was that thrilling. And by the way, when they first came out, they cost a fortune. I think Raiders of the Lost Ark actually was the first reasonably priced movie on VHS, which set some sort of new standard of like $30, something like that. But in addition to that, them being available within 45 days, some films are available same day, the same weekend that they open in theaters, they're available on your TV. So folks aren't going to theaters anymore because they know they could just have to wait and they can watch it at home. Add to that the growing affordability of larger screen televisions, or the fact that if you hold any screen to your face close enough, it's pretty big. It seems big. We're removing reasons for going to the movie theaters. But Hollywood is not adjusting to these changes in our behaviors or in their own. And certainly they're not letting on about that. In fact, the writers and actors are on strike right now because of things like this. The creative accounting of Hollywood to make films continue to seem unprofitable. And also the fact that, again, their methodology for releasing these films has changed, maybe making them less profitable, certainly on paper, certainly at the box office. So there's a number of factors to be considered as to why maybe Indiana Jones and films like it have not done as well as expected. But do not blame Gen X. I am still wholeheartedly enthusiastic about all things related to the media that was born in the decade, my favorite decade. In fact, I have a podcast that, every week that comes out that examines this phenomenon. But what do you think? Are you tired of seeing things related to 1980s? Are you excited to see the next Beetlejuice? Are you looking forward to Ghostbusters? I just saw Back to the Future, the musical, and that was fantastic. It's going to be on tour next year. Are you looking forward to that? Let me know.